recording. And yeah, let's get going. So we're going to talk today about JavaScript events and how we use them, what they are, why they're useful. And let's start. We have this little application here on the right that I opened up already with open index HTML. Let's do this again. We'll have to do this a lot. This is something you might already know how to open your project in your browser, but it's always good to remember how to do that. You can also use run a server with VS Code or run a simple HTTP server with Python. So we have our project open here on the right. This is, we have like a form here, a couple of buttons. If we click on any of this, none of it's working right now. If we type something into the form, it doesn't really do anything at this point. We want to make all of this functional. And we're going to start by hooking up one of our buttons, adding an event listener to it, and having it alert something to us. Let me open up this right here as well. By the way, yes, the background here is changing. You're not going crazy. This is some CSS that's changing the background slowly. All right, so let's get started by talking a little bit about events. So what are events? Events in JavaScript. Let me open this up. I have a cool, see if I can grab this. Here we go. All right, so this is a pretty cool code pen right here that will show you what kind of different events we have that we can use with JavaScript. Let me send out the link to you as well. You want to check this out. This is built, FYI, this is built with jQuery. If you don't know about jQuery, jQuery is a library that helps you with DOM manipulation. It used to be really, really popular. It's not as popular anymore nowadays because we have a lot of frameworks that do a lot of this work for us. But you might still see, if you're searching for information on the web about events or DOM manipulation or anything like that, you might see answers on Stack Overflow referring to jQuery methods. If you want to use jQuery, you have to grab the jQuery library. I would not recommend at this point that you get into jQuery. Just know that this is a library that's out there. That can make things a little bit easier for you, but it is not something that we're going to dive into here. It doesn't for this example, it doesn't really matter. We're just looking at the different types of events that we have. So we have click events. We can click on things, right? We have mouse over that will change something when we mouse over the item. Mouse out when we move the mouse out. Mouse up when we click and lift the mouse up. All these different kinds of events we have in JavaScript. Feel free to kind of check this out and try some of these out. We have like submit events, key down, mouse down. We're going to focus on just a few for now, but there are a whole lot that you can use to do different things with JavaScript. So the events that we're going to be focusing on for now are mainly click events and submit events. Submit events are for forms. We'll talk about that today as well. All right, so these are all the different types of events that we have. And let's actually start by creating our first event listener. We actually created one yesterday already, but let's add an event listener here to our page. I have a little bit of code in here already. These are just some pre-written function declarations. There's no functionality going on here yet. I have my DOM content loaded event listener. So that's actually our first event listener. Because we remember, if we have a script tag at the top of a file, we need to make sure that our HTML loads before our JavaScript does. So we can either defer our HTML up here, we can move our script tag down, or we can add a DOM content loaded event listener to our JavaScript. All right, so let's start with our first event listener. And our first one is, or our second one here, Our first one is going to, we're going to try to listen to an event on the Alert Me button. So if we click on the Alert Me button, I want an alert to pop up, right? So this is the Listen to Alert Me button click. Let's go ahead and write this out. So in order to create an event listener, I always need a couple of things. What is the first thing that I need to add an event listener? What do I add the event listener to?
Document?
It could be the document, absolutely. Can it be something else besides the document?
The button
Node.
icon.
Yeah, like a button, some kind of node on our page. Any kind of element on the page, really. It can be the entire document. It could be a button. It could be a link. It could be a form input. It could really be anything. So first, we need something that's called the event target. So what is the target of our event? When we click or when we submit this particular thing, what's supposed to happen? So what's that target? So in our case, our target, because we want to make our button clickable, our target is going to be the button itself. In order to make the button the target and like be able to call add event listener to it, what do we need to do first? So if I say like, my button dot add event listener, what do I need first before I can do this?
Elements to my button equals.
Yeah.
Document dot get element by ID. I assume it has an ID.
Yeah, let's take a look real quick. We got our button right here. Cool. So we have this button. We actually don't happen to have an ID on this. We could go ahead and add an ID to it. What else can we do though in order to find this button?
You could do a query selector for the name attribute.
For which attribute?
So do, I think, do button.
As in, as in
yeah,
that?
and then in square brackets inside right next to the button, like the attribute selector.
Okay.
Yeah, add a dash name equals alert.
Oh, okay. I see what you're going for. Cool. Yeah. So this is like very, very specific in like getting us that particular button. Nice. Thank you for that, Alec. We have this like data attribute. We'll talk a little bit more about data attributes toward the end of the lecture. But yes, we can select a particular button based on different types of attributes. If we don't happen to have an ID, in fact, the button that we have seems to be our first button on the page. So if we just went ahead and like did our query selector by selecting it will just automatically select the first button. Since the Alert Me button happens to be the first button, that will already get us to the result that we want to have. Now, it's not always. This is maybe a little bit dangerous to do because if someone goes ahead and like edits our HTML and puts in another button somewhere, then this might not return the correct button anymore that we're looking for. But for our purposes, this works. Let's find the button another way. Anybody have any other suggestions on how we could find this button?
You could do query selector for div with the ID of helicopter parent, and then grab the button. That's a child. That's a descendant of that. So then just space button.
Mm-hmm.
Would grab.
Yeah, so we could do something like that. Absolutely. One thing that you can also do is you should be able to chain your, let me see if that, you could chain your query selectors or get elements by ID, whatever you're doing. because essentially all you're doing is you're grabbing this one element, and then on that element, you're doing another query selector, and that will only find elements within that particular element. So that's one other thing you could do. We could do so many things here. I just want you to like see the possibilities. I know that this might be redundant, but we could do document dot get elements by say tag name, right? Get elements by tag name. We get all of our buttons, and then we just like grab our first button. That will also work. We can do document get elements by class name of button, and then we also grab our first button. There are just so many different things that we can do here in order to achieve the same goal. So let me just grab one. Yeah.
Is there just like a rule of thumb for figuring out which one would work? Or is this kind of like whatever works is whatever works?
It's kind of like whatever works, whatever works. There is no particular, for like query selectors and get element by ID, there are just a couple of slight differences, but for like what you're doing right now, there's no particular preference over one or the other. I would just say like whichever one you feel most comfortable with, use that one. There's not much of an advantage or disadvantage to using one versus the other. So, and you're probably going to get this answer from me a lot in JavaScript, because JavaScript is so, you can do it so many ways, and you can like achieve the same goals by going through completely different paths. In Ruby, or with Rails, it was a lot like, okay, this is how you do it, and this is the rule, right? And I know that can be a little frustrating with JavaScript, because it's just it makes you have to make the decision for what you're going to do, which can actually be really exhausting. That's one thing that can be really exhausting when you're a programmer having to make these decisions. But in this case, I would just say whichever one you feel most comfortable with. If you're like, okay, I understand what query selector does, try to use that one, try to perfect it, and then once you feel comfortable with that, maybe move on to a different one. Try out the get element by ID, just so that you can kind of get comfortable with all of them.
The first one that Alec had, and then like the one that was div helicopter parent query selector button. You were mentioning that if somebody were to change the HTML, those two would be like more specific each time, like, and it wouldn't alter the, like, you wouldn't have to change the query selector later on, right?
Exactly. So that's one good reason, like what Daniel mentioned, like that's one great reason to decide maybe against this query selector button, because it's very general. Like it just selects a button on the page. So just like I mentioned earlier, if we have another button and we put it somewhere here, this is like some other button. At that point, if we select our button with the query selector button, let's just refresh this. We're gonna get the wrong kind of button that we're not looking for, right? So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Was there another question there, Daniel, or did you just want to mention that?
I was just like to Brad's question about
right.
it. Like it's probably I was wondering, it's better to do it more specifically if you can remember how to do it that way, as opposed to doing it another way.
For sure. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's a really good point. Cool. Okay, so we found our button. And now what we can do is we can add an event listener to it. So the way that event listeners work is we use this method called add event listener. We change that to the target that we want to listen to. And then our event listener takes two arguments. The first argument is going to be, what do we want to listen to? So in our case, if we have some kind of button, we want to probably listen to some kind of click on the button, right? So we have a whole bunch of different things that we can listen to as we just saw in our like event handler zoo here. These are different types of things that we can do. We can listen to a mouse down, click, mouse over, submit, all of these different things. So in this case, we're going to listen to a click on our button. And then I mentioned that we have to pass in 2 arguments here. First argument, what do we want to listen to? Second argument, what do we want to do once this event actually fires? Like, what do we want to execute? What code do we want to execute when the button is actually clicked? And we do that, we pass that in the form of a callback function. That could look something like this, like just an inline function. We could also factor that out into a separate function. But this function right here is essentially our event handler. Like, what do we do once we click the button? So what do we want to listen to? What do we want to do once that event fires? Now this callback function, let's actually factor this out. Let's create another function, handle alert button click. So I'm just taking this function and putting it somewhere else, as opposed to writing it directly in line here. You could do either one. We're going to just probably experiment with both cases, so that you can kind of see like what the difference is or what the similarities are. But you can do either one, again, whichever one you feel more comfortable with. So one more time, we have our target. We have our event listener method, 2 arguments. What do we want to listen to? What do we want to do once that event fires? And then we have our handle alert button click. So let's just put like a console log in here. And let's just write hello. And let's try this out. Let me take this extra button. Take that out already? Yeah, okay. All right, so if I click my button here, I'm going to get the console log of hello. This is a success. We successfully wired up this event listener now. So whenever I click, we are console logging, we're logging something to our console. Now what we actually want to do is we probably want to alert the user, right? So we can just use an alert here. And we'll say a warning. I don't know. Let's try that out. Alert, and we get this little pop-up that tells us that something was wrong, possibly. All right, so this is it. Let's write this another way. So we can either do it this way, or we can just take the function here and just stick it in there. We don't. Okay, so these 2 right here are equivalent now. We don't actually have to give this function a name here because we're not going to use it anywhere else. So usually if you pass in a callback function here, it will just be an anonymous function. But this one right here, along with this function and these 3 lines right here do exactly the same thing. It's just a different syntax on how you can write your event listeners. And I just mentioned that this is called a callback function. Does someone know what a callback function is? What does that mean for something to be a callback function? So
when
go ahead.
The event listener in this case is looking for something, and then it's going to call or invoke the function that it's associated with. So why it's the back part has never been clear to me, but the calling function makes sense to me.
Yeah,
You
so
call that function based on the event listener.
right. So it's essentially like a function that, well, it's actually exactly like a function that we pass in as an argument that is going to get executed at a certain point in time, right? So we pass in this function, handle alert button click, as an argument to our add event listener, and it gets executed at some other time that we don't exactly know when that is, but it gets, in our case, it gets executed on the button click. So callback function is a function that we pass into another function that gets executed at some point, in our case, on the click of our button. All right, any questions here about any of this syntax that we've written so far, or any of the terminology that we've talked about? I want to make sure that you understand like what we're doing here. These few lines of code should be, if you have any questions about that, please ask.
Two quick things just to make sure I'm clear on one thing. So a callback function is whenever we're passing in an entire function declaration as an argument?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, okay, cool.
Sorry, go ahead.
I hear it referenced a lot, and I'm like, I can't quite tell what it means, except it means when an entire function gets passed into another function.
Yeah, so you actually mentioned a really good point. What we pass into our event listener is we are not passing in the return value of that function. We're passing in the function declaration itself, like the function without calling it, right? There's a difference between being able to reference a function, having like the function available so that you can call it, and actually executing or calling the function. So what we're doing here when we say handle alert button click, let's actually, if we were to just console log handle alert button click, just somewhere down here, what we get in our console might look a little weird at first, but what we get here is a function, right? We don't get this like alert warning. We don't get the return value of the function. We get the function itself. And the difference here is between like actually getting the return value or the whatever the function does is the parentheses, right? I did not add the parentheses here in order to execute this function. And I did not add the parentheses up here either. There's actually a great explanation for like why I wouldn't want to add the parentheses here, and I can show you what happens if we do. Let me comment this out. Okay, so if I add my parentheses here, that means that I'm immediately executing this function whenever I hit this line of code. So if I refresh my page, I'm going to refresh my page now, I immediately get this warning, right? My event listener essentially doesn't work. It's useless because all I'm doing is I'm immediately executing this function because I have my parentheses. This is super important. And it immediately gives me this pop-up right here, which completely defeats the purpose of our event listener. So if you add the parentheses, you are executing that function. You're going to be executing that function whenever you refresh the page, whenever the page loads, whenever we hit that line of code. That's why we want to pass in a reference to that function, as opposed to the actual function call. And Alec, did you have another question?
That just blew my mind and it's totally helped. So that's what a callback function is when you're telling a function what function to call on something. Okay, that's.
But you're not calling it right there. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Okay, cool. Yeah. And then I'm not hallucinating, not gradients animated, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
the
just making
background
sure.
is changing. Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can also turn that off if that's bothering anyone. Let's see. Cool. Yeah. So if you want to check out how that works, there's a little animation here that makes that run. All right. Any other questions here about this basic like click event listener that we added, or how event listeners work? We're going to build out more, but I want to make sure that you're comfortable with the syntax, you're comfortable with like what it does. All right. Cool. All right, so one more thing that I want to talk about is, and we're not going to actually use this quite, actually we'll use this right after the click event. So, but let's talk about this real quick. So whenever we attach an event listener, we get something that is called an event object for free. So whenever we pass in like a callback function here, into our event listener, we get something for free that is called an event. And we can see this event by passing this into our callback function. Let's do that here too. Let's just go ahead and console log that. And this event, these are equivalent. So let me comment this out. All right, so we're just gonna work with that one. This event right here, this is something, again, that you get for free from the browser. So the browser automatically creates this event object for you, and it puts like details into it about like what the event was, you know, where it came from, all that kind of stuff. And it automatically passes that into your, as an argument, into your event handler function. So we have our event handler here. We automatically get this event passed in. We can use it if we want to. We don't have to. You'll see in just a second like why it's useful, why we want to use it sometimes. But I just want to show you what that looks like. So let's refresh our page, click our button, and we have our event here console logged. Again, there's nothing else we have to do here in order to make this happen for us. The browser just passes that in for us for free. We just have to, actually have to give this a name, some kind of name that we want. This doesn't have to be called event. A lot of times you'll see it called E for event. It doesn't really matter though. Guess we're not able to open this up. Okay, anyway, this is, we'll look more into the event itself. This will show you like what type of event was it. This is some kind of mouse event. Like where was it on the screen? Like where did we actually click? Oh, we have to hit the OK here. Okay, there we go. So where did we actually click? There are a whole bunch of different properties here that we're not even gonna dive into. There's so many different ones. You know, like where was it clicked? What type of event was it? What was the target of the event? This is actually something that we are going to look into. Like where did we actually click? Like where did we actually fire this event off? This is our event target. And we'll use the event target in just a second as well. But the main point here is that we get this event for free from the browser, and it is automatically passed into our callback function, and we can use it if we want to. We don't have to. We just have to make sure that we give it some kind of name. Any questions about this free event that we got?
The client X and client Y, is that the position inside the, because we got coordinates there for where the click happened, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I think that's like from your, you know, your X-axis and your Y-axis, like where was this actually clicked? Where was the mouse? Where did the mouse event happen?
Okay, cool.
You can make a heat map with that.
Exactly. Yeah. If you've used or worked with something like Google Analytics or something like that, I don't know if they still do that, but they would provide you with like a heat map of where your users are usually on your site, right? And we don't even have to do that with click events. We can fire events on when the mouse moves, so we can exactly see like where the user has been hypothetically. It would be pretty expensive because the mouse moves a lot, right? But we could hypothetically see exactly like where someone is going, where they click, what, you know, if we want to track the stuff.
Without going down too much of a rabbit hole on the event details here, do we get additional data or different data for mobile? Because then we're using our finger, and that I suspect is going to be a slightly different interface.
That's a good question. You might get some kind of attribute, like let's see if there's something in here about like how it was clicked. I'm not exactly sure about that, but I think the event itself will be like pretty similar or pretty much the same, because all we're doing is we're clicking. I don't know if it tells you like how we clicked it, but if someone,
the top one says mouse click, so I suspect if it was a phone, it would say some type of other thing. It wouldn't say mouse event for a phone.
actually, we might be able to try this out. I don't know if this will like register, but if we switch, if you go here to your Chrome console and toggle the device toolbar, it will show you your website in the form of a mobile device, right? So let's switch to like Pixel 2. So this is what our site looks like on a Pixel 2. Maybe we want to zoom in a little bit. And then we have this like button looking thing here that we can move. So I wonder if this looks different than a mouse event if we click that. We still get a mouse event. I don't know if this just doesn't work on the browser, right, but I'm not exactly sure how it's different. Alec, you posted a couple of things. Oh, about the client X property.
For the timestamp, is that like how long we've been on that page in general? Because that number is a lot larger than the first option.
Can you say that one more time? You're like, a little quiet, Nathan.
Oh,
it's okay.
How about now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Yeah, there was a timestamp. Is that based off of like how long you're on that page? So that number on the second mouse event seems a lot larger than the first mouse event.
Timestamp. Good question. I do not know. We got 8228. Oh yeah. Yeah, let's try this out. I would like suggest that you play around with this a little bit. I don't know all of the different events either, but all right, so let's see. So let's refresh our page, click on it. And then this is a pretty low timestamp. If we click one more time. Yeah, that could be it. How long we've been. Like this is like, a second or something like that, 2 seconds. This is like 6-7 seconds. We click again. Yeah, it seems like that's what that is. Cool, yeah. Awesome. All right, so let's move on to do a few more. We're gonna just kind of work through different types of event listeners now. Now that we kind of know what the syntax is. And what we're going to do next is we're going to make our comment form work. So we have this little comment form here. We want to be able to like type something in, hit the submit button, and ideally actually like attach a comment to our page so that we can write some comments. Obviously, this is not going to persist. So the next time that we refresh the page, it's all going to be gone. But for now, we're not going to worry about persistence here. So we're going to do our next one here, listen to the form submit. So let's grab this function. Let's kind of throw that up here so that we have it at the top. All right, so we want to listen to the form submit, and it's super important that we, I did this previously, but it's super important that we actually call these functions here, right? So if we want to attach an event listener, we have to make sure that we call that function in our like DOM content loaded, if that's what you have. Or if you don't have that, you still have to call the function in order for your event listener to attach. So if we didn't have this here and we refreshed our page, we clicked on this, nothing would happen, right? Even though that like an event listener takes, like it waits for the click to happen, we still have to call this outer function. We could hypothetically like leave this function out and like throw all of our code directly into our DOM content loaded, or if we had to defer on the script, like just into our index.js, but it generally makes sense to kind of factor it out into different functions. All right, so our form submit. Our form submit is going to be a little bit different from our click handler in that it is we're gonna listen to a submit of a form. And what we want to do here is we want to be able to like add a comment to our page. So let's start by adding an event listener. If I want to add an event listener to the page, what's always the first thing that I need to do?
Button.
What was that?
Button.
Find the button or find something that I want to listen to, right? Exactly. Yeah. So the one thing about forms that you should remember is that if we go take a look at this form right here, this is a form right here. What we're not actually going to listen to is we're not going to listen to a click on the button, but instead we're going to listen to a submit on the form. This is special to forms, and I'll show you like why this is important. We could hypothetically get the same functionality working by listening to the button click, but it is it's convention that we listen to the form submit, and there are some benefits to it as well. So if we want to listen to the form submit, we have to make sure that we grab the entire form and attach our event listener to the entire form. So let's jump back here to our JavaScript and let's grab our form. Our form has an ID. Someone tell me how I grab this form with JavaScript. Document. I know you all know this. We have an ID.
Get element by ID.
Perfect. Okay, what did I, oh, gotta give this a name. Not enough coffee. Let's call this comment form. There we go. Cool, document get element by ID, comment form. Let's double check. Yes, that's the correct ID. All right, so we have our form. Next thing we want to do is we want to add an event listener to it. Let's add an event listener to our comment form. And what are the two arguments that I need for an event listener?
The event name and the callback function.
Exactly. So what do we want to listen to? In our case, this is going to be, we want to listen to the form and we want to listen to a submit on the form. So we're going to listen to a submit, and then we have a callback function. And let me, okay, so I'm gonna just kind of do this in different ways. So let's take this out. We'll just do this like, this will be just inline, right? And then we'll do this other one in a separate function. Handle, comment, form, submit. Cool. All right, so our callback function right here, notice we're not executing that. That's important. And then let's go ahead and just console log something. Awesome. So we got our comment form. We're adding the event listener. We're adding the, we're listening to a submit on that form. And then this is our callback function that we're executing whenever that submit happens. All right, so let's refresh our page. Let's put in a comment and hit submit. What happens? If you like watch the console here, you can see something flash for just a second, right? If you see this, like hello console log flash for just a second, does someone know what's happening here? Or what can you see that's happening to our page?
It looks like, is it refreshing?
Yeah, that's exactly what it's doing. Our page is refreshing. There is forms in HTML will always try to do one thing unless you tell them otherwise, which is submit to somewhere, which is post to somewhere, make a request, send the information somewhere, right? If you remember in Rails, like whenever you hit submit on a form, you would send your information to your controller, right? You would redirect the user somewhere else. You'd essentially, like your page would refresh. So any form in HTML, if you haven't done anything special to it, will try to make a post request somewhere to like send information. Now, this is not actually what we want in this case, because what we're doing with JavaScript is we're building, usually building single page applications. So we don't want to refresh our page. We don't want to send the user anywhere else. We want to keep the user, you know, we want to have everything to be happening on one page. That doesn't mean we can't route the user somewhere else. We'll talk about routing as well. But for now, we just want to keep the user here. No page refreshes when we submit a form or anything like that. So we have to do something called hijacking the form. We're essentially going to say, hey, this form, the default behavior that it does, we don't want that, like prevent that from happening. So we have to do a little bit of work to make that happen. And we're actually going to use our event, this free event that we get with every event listener, in order to prevent this form from executing that default behavior. So here we have our handle comment form submit. Let's pass in our event. Let's call it E. Again, it doesn't really matter what you call it. Event or E is just a common thing that you might call it. And we have to prevent the default behavior. And we do that by saying E.prevent default. So essentially all we're doing here is we're saying, on this event that happens, go ahead and prevent the default behavior. So for our form, the default behavior would be to try to submit and then therefore refresh our page. And if we refresh our page here, hit our submit button, we can see that nothing refreshes. We actually have our console log in the console. It stays around. We're not making any kind of post request anywhere. And we have successfully hijacked this form. Any questions about this prevent default?
But normally you wouldn't want that because you'd have other code that would, in theory, do something with that. The comment would refresh the screen with that new comment and all the other ones. That's how it was written.
It depends on what language you're using or what framework you're using. With JavaScript, we almost exclusively want that. We almost exclusively want to hijack the form and prevent the default. With Rails, we do not. We do not want to prevent the default behavior because we actually want to post something so that it can land at our controller. So it kind of depends on what you're working with. But with what we're doing now with JavaScript, we always want to prevent the default. Can't think of a good reason why we wouldn't here.
So literally all we're doing here is calling prevent default on the event object.
Yep.
And that stops the form. And that stops the form from doing anything?
Yep.
Cool.
It stops the form from doing its default behavior, which is submitting, making a post request.
Are these considered just JavaScript methods that we're using?
Yeah, so our event, that's a great question. So let's actually console log our event one more time. Let's submit here. Okay, so we have this event console log, right? This is our submit event. This event right here has certain attributes to it. But in addition to having these attributes, let's actually see if we can find this. Let's see, default prevent.
It's a little up, I think, where it says default prevent false or something. Default prevented true. It was higher up, I think.
Oh, okay. Default prevent. Yeah. So this tells us has the default been prevented or not. But I wanted to see if we could find the actual method. I don't know if it's on the constructor. No. So we usually with these kinds of things, with this free event that we get from the browser, this is an event object, right? Objects can have different attributes. You have key value pairs. Those key value pairs can point, the keys can point to values that could be just about anything. It could be a string, it could be a number, it could be a function, it could be another object, it could be an array. So we have this event object that has a function on it, which if you have a function that lives on an object, it's in JavaScript, that's called a method. It's still a function, but it's technically called a method because it lives on another object. So we have this method that lives on this event object and that we get for free. We get this event object for free, and therefore we get all methods with it as well that the browser provides to us. One of those methods is the prevent default method. And all we're doing here is we're executing that method. There's code somewhere in the background that makes sure that the form doesn't submit if we call this method. So this is just a method on our event object that we're executing, that we're using. We didn't write this ourselves. we get this for free just with the event.
Is there a way to check the methods available to you?
Yeah, so usually you would see this, depends on like what kind of method it is, but you should see this in the, like the proto.
You might be able to see it in the proto event at the bottom of the proto. Right there at the very bottom.
This right here.
Oh, no. Yeah, there it is.
Where is it?
You can see the actual code for that. That's just
Prevent default. Oh yeah, there it is. Cool. It's the thing with JavaScript that makes this a little bit difficult is that JavaScript implements something called the prototype chain, which means that that we can inherit from other pieces of functionality. This is like going super deep into JavaScript, by the way. We can inherit other pieces of functionality that can inherit from other pieces of functionality, and we can just kind of go down the chain like that. So it's not always, it might not always be super clear where that functionality is coming from, because it could be anywhere down the chain. In this case, I guess it's just like on the event itself. So we have this like prevent default method. So if you want to just kind of like dig deeper, you can see this in the console. You can open up these, like they're called Dunder Proto attributes, and you can see like what kinds of methods you have. I would just recommend, if you're actually like trying to figure out like what you can do with something, check out the documentation. It's a lot, in my opinion, it's a lot easier to, look at the methods there than digging through the prototype chain here. But if you want to do that, you can do that also. Cool. Any other questions? Oh, we went into this pretty deeply. Okay. All right, so let's finish up our comment form. So we have prevented the default. We now want to make sure that we want to finish this and actually show a comment underneath our comment form. So whenever we hit a submit button, we want to grab the value of our input field and then append that to the page. We can do that in a couple of different ways. So if we type something in here, right, submit, can someone think of like how we might go about getting this, comment right here, like pulling this comment out of a form?
Could you select the input field from the?
Yeah, absolutely. We even have an ID on this, right? Yeah, so we could select our input field. Let's call this input field or input element. We can do this by saying document get element by ID, right, with our new comment. And let's actually, let's use a debugger here. I would recommend that you get comfortable with both using the console log and the debugger. The debugger, if you haven't used it, let's check this out. Once we refresh the page, the debugger is pretty much like binding.pry or bybug. It essentially stops our code wherever we are. So if we type something in, hit our submit, we now are in this like bybug. You can see that it says pause the debugger. We're in this debugger right here. And this sends us to a sources tab, which shows us where our debugger is. And it also shows us, which is pretty cool, right here. If we look at these like different functions that we have access to our event here, which is our submit event. We have access to our input element, and if we just kind of hover over it, it shows you what it is. But the actual cool part about this is, since it kind of stops where you are, you can jump into the console and you can take a look at all the variables that you have available to you. So like the input element, the event, right? And you can kind of play around with that here. Again, super similar to bybug or binding.pry, just kind of stops where you are. One small thing about the debugger, and you might run into this and get really frustrated, is that because of how Chrome works, because of like what I mentioned the other day or yesterday about the improving developer the developer experience in the developer tools here, there are certain quirks to the debugger. One of them is for performance reasons. What the debugger does, or what our console does, is it will not, if we had a variable here, const my variable, right? If we have this variable here and we run our debugger, we do not have access to that variable inside of this function unless we actually use that variable inside of the function. So the debugger will do a little bit of like garbage collecting. This is not the actual behavior. We always have access to this kind of variable here if it's outside of the function. In this case, because it's in the global scope. But just keep that in mind, that the debugger is a little weird like that with variables that you aren't using within functions. We can dive into that a little bit deeper. I just wanted to mention that to you. Okay, so we're in our debugger. Let's play around with this a little bit. We have our input element that is already the form itself. I want to get this input element in a different way. In particular, I want to get this through my event. One thing that you can always do, and we're going to be doing this a lot, is looking at your event target, which the event target is always like the target, like what is what's like in front of the dot, right? What did you actually call the event on? So in this case, it is our comment form, the entire form itself. If we open this up, we can see that we have our input field, our submit button, and everything. So our event target is always like what are we on which element are we listening? Which element are we listening to? So this is our comment form. So if we take a look at our event target, we can from there select different elements within this target. So earlier we changed multiple query selectors, right? We can do the same thing here. So we can say event target dot query selector, and then we'll just kind of grab our input field. Maybe that will just give us our first input field. Also not super specific, but that works. One other cool thing you can do though, let me just kind of copy this. This is just one other way that we can do this. Cool. One other thing that we can do is we can use, if we take a look at our input field, let's add an attribute here called name, and let's call this comment form, or let's just call it comment actually. So we now added a name attribute to our input field, which means that, let me play our debugger here and refresh our page one more time. Test. All right, so if we jump back to our console here, we can now, with this name attribute, go from our event target directly to our input field by saying event target dot comment. There we go. So we're in a way naming this piece of this DOM node, so that we can select it later on through our event target. So this name attribute, whatever we named this here, we named it comment. We can get that the input field directly through this name attribute by saying event target dot comment. If we named it event target dot potato, it would be event target dot potato. So this is just one really quick way that you can get to your input fields within a form. And the reason that I'm telling you this is, first of all, you're going to actually be using this a lot in React. And secondly, it's just, the syntax is just a lot shorter, and it makes it easier to select multiple elements, multiple input fields in a form. So also we don't need any kind of IDs on there. So we don't have to do any like query selector, but we can just give our input elements name attributes, and then we can just say our input, our call this like comment input or something like that is just event target.comment. Any questions about that?
Those, yeah, okay. Never mind. You just answered my question with the commenting out.
Yeah, these are all of these three will get us to the exact same result. All right, so on top of this, obviously we don't want the entire input field, right? You might ask, like, why do we even care about this input field? We don't really, but we want the value of that input field. So if we now take our event target.comment and we say .value, that will actually give us the text that the user typed in. Pretty cool, right? So now let's give this, let's create another variable here. We'll say comment value equals comment input dot value, and that will give us the text that the user typed in. Cool. And let's just kind of like console log this for now. All right. Let's submit this. Awesome. And we get our comment console logged, right? Obviously, we want to do something with this. I'm going to do this real quick because we're running a little low on time. So what we want to do is we want to add this. We want to now add this new comment to our page somehow. And I think we have a div right here, which is a comments container that we can use in order to like append something to it. So we're going to grab this comments container, comments, call it comments container, and it has an ID, so we can just say document get element by ID. And then to this comments container, we want to add our new comment, and we can go ahead and like maybe create an actual element. Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and do this. All right, so let's create like a new comment element, comment element, and we'll say document.create element. This is how we create a new element, right? We'll just make this a p tag, and then we'll give this like a text content of our comment value, right? So we're just creating this new p tag with the text content of the value that the user typed in. And then we take our comments container, and we can, to that comments container, we can append, let's append child our comment element, and that should do it. Let's submit, and let's write some more comments. Awesome. And one other thing, by the way, with a form that we have, is that whenever we type something in here and we hit our enter, our return key, it like submits that, right? This is the cool thing about forms. If you just had an input field and a submit button, you wouldn't have that functionality. But that's why we have a form, so that we can either hit the submit button or we could hit our enter key. Now, usability wise here, I'm not liking this because whenever I hit submit, it just kind of keeps my comment around. Does someone know of like a quick way that we can remedy that? I want to clear the comment after I'm done, after I submit.
Set .value to null or blank.
Exactly. So we have our comment input, right? And we want to set our value equal to just like an empty string or something. So if we now submit, we are every time we're submitting, we're clearing that comment. Important note here, because I've seen this, I've seen students do this a lot. What we cannot do is we cannot say comment value now equals an empty string. Why can we not do this? Because once we pull the value out of the comment input, it will just be in a plain old string, right? So comment value here, this variable right here is just a string of the comment that we actually typed in. has no reference back to our actual input field. That's why we actually need to say here, comment input dot value equals something. Hope that makes sense. We'll probably review this a couple more times, but I've definitely seen students do this a lot, and it's a little difficult to wrap your head around at first, but just remember that once we pull the value out, it's just a plain string. Like, we're not able to set this variable. If we set this variable to an empty string, we're just setting the variable itself to an empty string. We're not setting the input value to an empty string. All right, any other questions here?
Side question.
Yeah.
Can you set custom properties on these element objects? So if you did comment L dot potato equals awesome, would that persist in the session until gets reloaded?
So if you want to set, so essentially what you're saying is that you would be creating like your custom attributes here, like potato, right? That's what you would be doing by saying like comment input dot potato equals awesome.
Okay.
If you do want to set custom attributes, you would use something like a data attribute. So if
Got
we
it.
said like data dash potato, that would absolutely work. But like making up your own HTML attributes is not a thing. I don't know. I don't think you'd get an error, but maybe you would. But if you want to set like custom attributes, it would be like a data attribute. We'll
Okay,
talk
that
about
makes sense.
data attributes in a second as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have just a few more minutes. So last topic that I want to talk about is something called event delegation. Event delegation is something that we can use whenever we have lots of elements on our page that we don't want to attach event listeners to each and every one of them. We are actually we're literally delegating the action of like what happens when we click something to another element on our page. That's why it's called event delegation. So what that looks like on our page, if we take a look at these buttons right here, we have 3 buttons, right? Say we had like 20 buttons, we had 100 buttons. That would be a lot to keep saying like, where do we have our button? Like query selector button, add event listener for each and every one of our buttons, right? That would be a lot of work. So if we have a lot of buttons in this case, the best thing that we can do is use event delegation. And the way that event delegation looks, let me open up another CodePen here, and I'll post this in our Slack as well. So what this looks like is something like this. If I click on one of these center elements here, we have in this code right here, which is jQuery again, don't worry about that. What we've done is we've delegated the click event. So like we click somewhere to one of our parent elements. So probably this like parent box right here. So our parent box is going to listen to every single click event that happens inside of it. Every single click event, right? And then once we click one of our boxes here, what happens is that the event itself, we click on something, it bubbles up all the way to our like parent element. And this is what that looks like. It's like you click on one of the, and this is all because of the way that it's coded. Feel free to check this out, but this is actually kind of what's happening. We bubble up to the element that we have this listener on. And notice also, like if I click on one of the larger ones, these inner ones aren't affected in any way, right? So we bubble up from wherever we are to our most outer box that we have our event listener attached to. There's a difference also between there's something called event bubbling, like I just mentioned. There's also something called event capturing, which is really just the opposite. It works the opposite of bubbling. Like we can either like bubble up or trickle down our event. I'm not going to talk about capturing too much. Just remember for now that like the way that our when we click on one of these is that it like bubbles up to wherever we have our event listener. And then we are able to select our element that has been clicked, that we clicked at that point, and we can do something based on which element was clicked. And that's exactly what we're going to do. You're going to see this in action, so it'll probably make a lot more sense once we actually code this out. So hold your questions for now, and let's see if we can get this working. So we want to attach an event listener to our parent element, which our parent element in our case is our helicopter parent. And by the way, another like great reason why we might want to do it this way is if we have like a whole bunch of nested elements, right? We have like all these divs and like different elements in between, and then there are buttons like all the way down, super nested. We don't really have to worry about that with event delegation, because let's set this up. So let's grab our helicopter parent. It happens to have an ID. We can do that by helicopter parent, document, get element by ID. All right, so we have our helicopter parent, and instead of adding an event listener to each one of our buttons, alert me, console log, console error, we're going to add an event listener to our parent element. So we're going to say helicopter parent dot add event listener, and we still want to listen to just a click event, and we're still going to have a callback function that does a particular thing whenever we click someone. But one thing that is interesting, if we look at our event target, so I'm going to grab our event here. I'm going to console log our event target, and let's see what this looks like. Let me actually, I'm going to comment out this alert me button click, because that will just interfere with what we're doing. So if I click on this console log something, the event target that has been logged is this particular button that I clicked on. If I click on the console error, the target that's been logged is the console error button. So it's like the actual thing that I clicked on. But I only had to attach one single event listener in order for this to happen. And again, like the event, like once we click on something, it like bubbles up to our parent element, which is our like helicopter parent. It triggers our event listener, but our event target will be the parent, will be the element that we actually clicked on. By the way, if you want to get the element that the event listener is attached to, I believe you can say default target. Let's check that out. What was it? Is it not default target? Throw a debugger in here real quick. All right, so event. So we got our event target, event dot current target. That was it. Sorry, default target's not right. So the event current target is always going to be the element that the event listener is attached to. So in our case, it's the actual helicopter parent. What we want though is our event target. So what did we actually click on at that point in time? Okay, so at this point, are there any, what questions do you have about event delegation and how we're using it?
So what's happening here is that the event itself is being reported to each parent element of an element that the event gets called on. So if you click the button, that click event gets reported to every parent element all the way up. And then whichever one has an event listener on it will catch the event.
Yeah, that's
okay, cool.
Perfectly explained. Yeah, exactly. Any other questions? Brad, are you trying to, we can't hear you.
Thank you.
I saw you move your mouth though.
So the event listener, if we click the submit button, it would also catch that and enact that code as well?
That's a good question. let's take a look at our HTML code. Our helicopter parent is right here, right? It does not
in the
contain our
entire,
form.
okay.
But if we click our text with a text of hi, this actually triggers the, let me take the debugger out. It's out already. So let's refresh this real quick. So if we go back to our console, if I click one of the buttons, the event target is the button. If I click this text, it's the text that I click, because the text is inside of that element where I added the event listener. Also, if I click like outside or like somewhere here, right, the event target is whatever I clicked on. If I click on my submit button, the event target, like, it's not contained within our helicopter parent, so it doesn't trigger that particular event listener. Does that answer your question, Bren?
Yeah, it does. I didn't remember that the submit was in a different master div. Yeah.
Cool. So any other questions here?
So you did the function listen to button clicks just to show how bubbling worked, not because we actually need it for something?
No, we need it, and we're actually going to use it here. Where I'm going to finish this,
Okay.
and we're going to, yeah, sorry, I wasn't quite done yet. And so we're going to have each of these buttons do something. So we actually have to add some more logic here to make sure that we don't automatically do something whenever we click anywhere, but we only like give the user an alert whenever we click on like this alert me button, right? Or we give the user like a console log whenever we click on this console log button. So what we need to do in order to make that happen here is we need to add some kind of conditionals to make sure that this only happens if we click this particular button. So let's add a condition here. And we're going to say, if our event target, and let's actually, before we do this, let's throw a debugger back in here. And let's refresh our page, hit our alert me button. And let's take a look at our event target. This is our button. How can we differentiate our buttons from each other? If we take a look at our buttons, what's the one thing that's like different about each one of the buttons besides the text content?
The data name.
Yeah, the data name. So data attributes in HTML are special attributes that are like, they're HTML attributes that you can decide what they're called yourself. The only thing, so you can essentially create your own like HTML attributes. The only thing that is important that has to be always the same is this data dash part. So if you want to create like a custom attribute that is called data dash name or data dash potato, you can do that. You can create these custom attributes. Doesn't have to be called anything in particular, but you have to keep this data dash part. Everything else after, you can decide what you want that to be. And the way that we can access, and the reason, by the way, that this is useful is if you have some kind of, let's say you have like an ID on each one of your elements, like you have a bunch of, where you just, someone was just talking earlier about like a like button or something, right? To attach an ID.
Yeah, like counting the number of likes on something.
Yeah, so if you want to attach an ID to something, say maybe we have a bunch of comments and each comment has an ID. We might do that with a data attribute. So we might say like data dash ID equals 1, data dash ID equals 2, whatever it is. The way that we can access data attributes is by saying event.target.dataset. And let's take a look at our dataset. Dataset is all of the data attributes that we have. In this case, we just have one. But it is, it's pretty much like an object where we can access the different attributes. So if we say event target dataset.name, it will actually give us like the string of the, whatever we typed into for our data attribute. If we have another one here, data dash potato. Good. What that looks like is if we click on this, we take a look at our data set, we now have multiple attributes in our data set. This is absolutely possible. Just know that you can have more than one if you want to. Okay, so we want to use this event target data set name, because that gives us back this like string of whichever button we're clicked on. And let's take this debugger out. And let's write our if statement. And we'll say event target, if the event target data set name is equal to alert, then go ahead and like alert the user, right? Otherwise, if our data attribute is, what else do we have? Log, right? So let's just kind of copy this stuff. If it's log, then go ahead and console log something. Otherwise, we have like a console error, right? Let's go ahead and console.error warning. All right, let's try this out. So I'm going to hit my alert button. It gives me an alert. I'm going to hit my console button. It gives me a console. Let's take this console log out here. It gives me something in the console. If I do console error, it gives me this like console error right here. And this all seems to be working just great. Now, what if I click on my high text? Ooh, still get like a warning here in my console if I click anywhere else. How come that's happening?
Because the event's getting related to the helicopter parent, and it's basically just an else. So if the target equals anything but alert or log, it's been warning.
Yes. So what we want to do here is we want to turn this else into an else if, because otherwise we're always going to hit it. This way we are excluding everything that is not one of our three buttons. So if I click anywhere else, nothing happens. But if I click on one of our buttons, we are getting the correct response. This is pretty much it. Any questions about, and this is like how we would actually use it. I hope that answers your question, Danira. Yeah, okay.
Can you repeat what you just said? About why we needed the extra else if?
Yes, yeah, so I had the else previously, right? So that means like on our helicopter parent, because our helicopter parent is more than just these three buttons, it's also the text up above and like all of the, like if we inspect this, let's take a look real quick. If we hover over a helicopter parent, everything that's in this blue box right here is part of our helicopter parent. So anywhere we click in there is we're going to execute this code right here. Now, because I only had the else right here, whenever I click on one of anywhere else that's not on one of these two buttons right here, it will execute this else conditional. That's why I had the else if, because I want to be more specific. Like only if you actually click on one of the buttons here do I want to execute something. Does that answer your question, Ashley?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Cool. All right, let's do a little bit of refactoring. We'll just create this like data name attribute, and we'll set that equal to our event target. And then we will place all of these. Just makes it look a little nicer. Any last questions before we close things here? How did you all feel about this? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay. All right, cool. Events take some time to get used to. The best thing you could do is like play around with it. Obviously, go through the labs, but just try attaching event listeners to something and see what happens. Like add some click event listeners to something, like make something fun happen. Change the background color when you click on something, or when you hover over something. I would recommend like take a look at the options that you have of like the different types of events. If you go to MDN like events. Let's see, oh, event types or something like that. Event reference. You have all of these. Let's see. We want like mouse events. So we have all of these like different mouse events that we can use, that we can do fun things with. So play around with that and see where you can get, what you can do. And also like feel free to share if you've, share in our Slack channel if you've done something cool.